Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good to have you back on. Thank you for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with stocks on Wall Street, which were down early in the session on Thursday, but ended up with a decent gain across the board. Analysts expecting a big surge in employment last month compared to a year earlier. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, if you look at the U.S. market, overall markets will continue to show very strong strength. Dow added 0.9%, touching a record close of 34,500 plus, and S&P 500 rose by 0.8%, well above 4,200 level, and Nasdaq quite weak, but still it came back quite nicely by rising about 0.4% to about 13,600 level. Clearly, the overall jobless rate coming in, the jobless claims falling more than expected to a new yearly low, with overall April numbers being the lowest since 2000. So this is clearly showing that the labor productivity growth rate beating the overall market consensus, and overall labor market looking quite good, and that added a positive sentiment for the U.S. market. Of course, there's continued to be some concern about the global economy, where a lot of the COVID-19 new cases are happening. But as far as the U.S. is concerned, they plans to show quite significant vaccinations by end of July. So clearly that is fitting into the economic recovery that most of people are now expecting. So overall, U.S. market continues to lead the global economic growth rate, and obviously that resulting into highest record high level of the U.S. equity market, and also that actually added into the most of global equity market, and they're all showing quite nice trading overall rise yesterday and today.
And today here in Korea, stocks with a rise, much like that in the U.S. The KOSPI again touching 3,200, the KOSDAQ touching 970. Tell us about the local markets.
Yes, Korean market continues to show rising trend from yesterday. KOSPI is up about 0.6%, and KOSDAQ is up about 0.9%. Still, it's a little bit off from the previous peaks, but nevertheless, KOSPI is near to 3,200, and KOSDAQ is close to 980 level. If you look at the uncertainty about the monetary policy side, people will continue to be concerned with the Powell continue to be quite loosened in terms of the monetary policies, but Janet Yellen was talking about possibility of interest rate hike in U.S., feeding into possibility of Bank of Korea raising interest rate earlier than even U.S., and that has concerned overall market liquidity conditions or market sentiment. But Bank of Korea have come up and said that the bank shouldn't be in a rush to tighten monetary policy, despite an unexpected pickup in economy due to uncertainties because of the uncertainties over the COVID-19. And if you see Korea, we see continuation of overall quite a large number of the COVID-19 cases, and vaccination continues to remain quite weak relative to U.S. or any other countries in the world. So people are concerned, but overall, Korea is very much export-oriented country, and global economic recovery happening that is fitting into positive trends that we're seeing in terms of Korean equity market, both sides of KOSPI and KOSDAQ.
And zooming out a little bit, we saw a significant rise in consumer prices last month in Korea, partly on higher oil prices, and some expect that prices could keep rising this year along with oil. So what is inflation going to look like relative to your outlook for oil?
Right. The oil price is very important, obviously, for Korea as well as global economy. If you look at the raw material cost, had been rising quite rapidly since the end of last year. Clearly, first half of this year is showing a very significant rise, and the oil price is one of that. And obviously, oil price is quite a big implication for the inflation numbers. And that number coming in at close to $70 per barrel. Right now, it is at off from the 69.95 barrels 2 months ago. Now it's down to about $66, $67. But nevertheless, it is relatively high numbers. But I guess we are looking into the future. Right now, oil price seems to be quite stable because if you look at the pandemic-related what's happening to global economy, there's still concern about the India and Japan. And also, there's a gradual overall oil production that's happening because of the higher demand that we're seeing in the global economy. So supply and demand side, oil price seems to be quite reasonable. And we know that shale gas production is going to come back if the oil price continues to remain well above $65 per barrel because their overall cost level is about $40 to $45. And right now, they need to have a higher cash flow in order to survive in a longer-term basis. We think that the sentiment about the oil price will continue to be quite subdued with the inventory levels where it is. And yes, but the demand sentiment is quite good. So we think that it's kind of neutral territories, and we will probably see a box range or trading range somewhere between $60 to $65 per barrel in the future.
And staying with the international perspective, in late April, the won to dollar exchange rate hit a low as the dollar index declined, but the dollar has come back up a bit since then. So now won to dollar with around 11.20. A lot of that, it would seem, as things you mentioned just a minute ago, monetary policy, appetite for risk, but trade is also at play here. So tell us what you see happening with the exchange rate.
Right. As you said, the trade is very important. If you look at the South Korea's current account surplus, it has widened to $7.82 billion in favor of 2021. Obviously, it is a very strong number. The goods account surplus increased to $7.92 billion from $6.96 billion a year ago, and the service account gap narrowed to $0.9 billion from $1.65 billion. So clearly, this is positive news, say, for the Korean won movement, meaning that Korean won can appreciate further. Trade account as well as the current account are all showing very strong numbers, which means that the Korean won can appreciate even more. Yes, there are concerns about the consumer debt level in Korea and domestic consumption being weak, but still we see very strong export numbers are coming through. Global economic growth rate positively fitting into the current account surpluses, and that means that Korean won can continue to appreciate on its own. Also, on top of that, as you said, the U.S. dollar index is moving quite nicely to the downside, weakening. Right now, it is at about 90.8 index level, which is off from as high as 92 in a few weeks ago. So clearly we are seeing some depreciation environment with a very strong fiscal and monetary policy that you see in U.S. Yes, U.S. economy is very, very strong in terms of economic growth rate, which is acting as a positive implication for the U.S. dollar strengthening. But because of such a high level of the injection of liquidity and also huge amount of current account deficit, trade deficit that has resulted into U.S. dollar being weak. So overall, we do think the Korean will appreciate relative to U.S. dollars. That should be positive news for the Korean equity market, as the foreign investor would probably come back into buying of Korean equities.
Got it. All right, we'll have to leave it there for today. Mr. Yu, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us as always, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.